So we have two very special speakers today who have flown in to be here with us. We have, we have bios, 3. But we've got John Horky, FAIA. He is the founder of Ripples by Design. And we have Josh Flowers, FAIA. He is the Senior Risk Manager and Legal Counsel at Gresham Smith. John is going to do it's going to be 2 segments. John will do the HR segment, and Josh is going to do the legal segment. So we'll have, instead of, typically I know we do the conversation on the reading, we're not going to do that today to give them more time to speak.
But lots of time for Q&A.
Lots of time for Q&A, so please leave your questions on the board. Obviously we want to be interactive. But with that, I'll introduce John. So John is our first speaker. He's a registered architect in Wisconsin, where he spent 23 years as a principal at Taylor Slater, leading their HR team to 15 years of recognition as one of the best small companies to work for in America. In 2022, he launched Ripples by Design, a career coaching and consultancy firm aimed at helping designers and firms make a greater impact. John has served on various councils and received the 2021 Golden Award from AIA Wisconsin for his contributions to the profession. He's an active leader in the AIA, advocating and supporting emerging and underrepresented professionals in the architectural field. And with that, we'll give John a big welcome.
I'll go ahead and introduce Josh now, and then John will jump into his session. The second speaker we have today, Josh, is both a registered architect and licensed attorney. He serves as legal counsel for Gresham Smith, a national AE firm based in Nashville. Josh plays a key role in overseeing legal, insurance, and compliance matters while also being a leader within the AIA, currently serving as vice moderator of the AIA Strategic Council, and next year will be AIA Secretary. Nice. Josh has been recognized with numerous awards as well and is frequently speaking on legal issues impacting architectural practice. He was also very active in YAF and helped launch many MBA workshops for AIA national conferences over the past decade. So he is well versed in this. So we're glad to have Josh here as well.
Round of applause.
With that, we will hand it over to the experts.
All right, tapping in.
Tapping in.
Go for it.
So as you can see, very formal in the presentation. So Sam and Shannon had a board out there, and a lot of you provided questions in advance of the program. So they forwarded all of them. We looked them over and actually found some patterns, as one might. So the bolded ideas are ones that we want to make certain that we hit on because they were questions that came from you. And there will be a couple of blocks for Q&A. So if you didn't hear your question addressed, don't hesitate to bring it up. I'm going to try and hit some of these. So, some of them were a little bit more legal. That got a JF. Some of them were a little bit more HR. That got a JH. And David, is there something? We're doing okay? All right. So anyways, and I'm going to try and hit on some of the HR ones while we're talking. So this is rule 1 for HR. Love your employees. And this rule comes from Mark Toth. Mark is the Senior Vice President of Legal Affairs at Manpower. If you've ever heard of Manpower, it's a global staffing firm. It's actually headquartered in Milwaukee, where I am. And so I had the opportunity to meet Mark when I started my HR journey, almost 24 years ago. And Manpower has 30,000 FTEs. They have 600,000 people worldwide, employees. And Mark gave annual legal updates. And so, us locally, we'd come in, it's like, okay, Mark, what's new on the legal front? And he always started with this slide. And he said, if you do this, if you love your employees, that will take care of 99% of everything. I mean, you will avoid 99% of any legal issues if you keep that, if this is your attitude. So that's rule one, love your employees. My journey started out normal, got my degree in architecture, worked for about a half a dozen years following a standard normal career path. And in the firm I was with at the time, Kaler Slater, when I started, we were 35 people. In less than a decade, we had grown to 100 people, and we needed somebody focusing on HR. The firm tapped me on the shoulder and said, John, would you please be interested in doing this? I said yes. It was fantastic. As Sam mentioned, it was a really special firm. 15 years in a row, recognized by the Great Place to Work Institute as one of the best small companies to work for in the country. It wasn't until 2015, so I started as the HR person in '98. It wasn't until 2015 that I actually was able to articulate why the hell I said yes to the opportunity to be the HR person. And it was a part of my summary statement for fellowship that I put together. And this is the beginning of it, creating and nurturing cultures of engagement in the practice of architecture. And then it's longer than this, but one of the key components was connecting staff to the firm vision. All right, hey, this is gonna work too. More importantly, what I discovered in that moment was a way to articulate my passion. And so there you go, another opportunity for you. If you want to do HR right, make certain that either you, if it's a smaller firm and you're wearing many hats, either make certain that you, or the person you hire to lead HR, if you're a larger firm, or the consultant with whom you work to support you in HR is passionate about people. Sam and Shannon asked that we look at and leverage the Architect's Handbook for Professional Practice for this presentation. Show of hands, like, who actually read this section of the AHPP? Actually, that's like 2/3. So, and I'm going to figure some of you were kind of lying, so maybe half. So there are 4 sections to it. I think it was a total of 80 pages. And I made a comment to Sam and Shannon that, man, I wish I would have read this back in 1998. I don't know if it was as robust then, but it's pretty good. It's not it's not without its flaws, but it's pretty good. And especially the first section, so that 8.1 HR overview. It's written by Barbara Irwin. If you don't know her name, and HR is a part of your responsibility set, get to know Barbara's name, because she is a legitimate rock star. I think I've seen her present a couple of times to AEC groups, but it's when people would sort of have conversations with me at HR events, and it's like, oh, so you're an HR person. I said, well, I'm an architect who's doing HR. It's like I was pretending to be an HR person. Barbara is the real deal, through and through. So let Barbara be your mavis. What that means is when I got the tap on the shoulder in '98, hey, would you do this? Instead of reading the AHPP, I went to the HR club. And that was a group of 15 people, so not unlike the size of your group. And Mavis Luther was a consultant, was an HR consultant, and she had a 9-month program. Every month it was a different topic. So it's like one topic was compensation strategies, another month was the Fair Labor Standards Act, another month was family medical leave. So we were able to kind of drill through, do a lot of readings. It was a binder. Honestly, I looked for the binder. I was going to haul the binder along and slam it down on the table and say so this was the Bible. But actually, when I looked at Barbara's, her contribution, what she wrote for the handbook, she has 9 categories, and I would say in the 4 that I have bolded there, that's where I ended up spending the majority of my time. So for the 23 years I was the HR lead, I think I spent the majority of my time on those 4 topics in one manner or another. And just a shout out on onboarding, she has a simple list in there. These are like basic onboarding things. But if you do those basic onboarding things that are on that list on page 448, you're going to be ahead of, I'm going to guess, 80% of the firms out there. So everybody always can intellectualize or articulate, well, it would be good if we did, but then they don't do it. Do this list. It's not an exotic list. Do that list, and you are going to be doing great things. So it all starts with vision, and this is what hang on a second. Did I skip? No, I didn't. Okay, so it all starts with vision, and this is what I think our firm did really well. And that's what the book, I'll tell you more about the book later. Many of you may have already processed through either creating a vision or being a part of the creation of a vision for your respective firms. It doesn't matter what model you choose, it's just like choose one and then go with it. We happen to use the model that Jim Collins had created in his book Built to Last. That was like a book from the early 90s. I think it's still valid, it's still legitimate, and the image is pretty much right out of his book. Whoever wants to, or if at Q&A, if you want to dive into what this model is, we can do that. But the keys, I think, are get everyone involved. So this is not 2 or 3 people or 5 people going off to the mountaintop, or if you're a fan of Aaron Rodgers' ayahuasca dark cave thing, and then coming back and telling everyone what the vision is. But the opportunity to create a vision is an opportunity to engage everybody in your organization. And it's a lot more time up front, getting all of those voices and working through it. My unofficial statistic is you get a 10x return on that time because people buy into the vision. And so then for the years that you're operating with that vision in place, people are on board as opposed to continuing to question, well, why are we doing things this way? And then be disciplined about operationalizing it. So actually go through annual planning and always with the vision as your root. All right, cue break. So this question break. This comes off of some of the questions that had been submitted in advance. There were like 4 questions related to handbook. I don't know if it came from one person who was just really interested in employee handbooks, or if it's several of you that this was a topic, but it's like, how frequently do we update it? Should I have an attorney review it? What are the legal traps? What are the must-haves? And Josh may have an opinion on this as well because the word legal's in it. So my recommendation is remember rule number 1, love your employees. And that takes care of literally 99% of any problems. You should have a handbook. I'm not saying you don't need a handbook, but it won't be like this critical legal tool if you're doing Rule 1. Don't try and write it on your own. They're very difficult, and don't rely solely upon AI, which was not an issue in 1998, but it is an issue now. I mean, you really have to own this. When you publish something like a handbook to your employees, The funny thing is, and it's like, oh, nobody ever reads handbooks, and when we have to have this sign-off statement that says that you read the handbook, but the dirty secret is people actually read it. And when do they read it? They read it when they have an issue or a question or a concern. And then they come to you and say, well, it says this, and that's not what we're doing. And that's when the whole card, what am I thinking of? The House of Cards, thank you, starts to crumble. Here's a resource, the SHRM. So who knows what SHRM is? Raise your hand. Josh knows what SHRM is. Josh doesn't get the bonus. The Society for Human Resources Management. Just like AIA, but for HR. And they are a great organization. And SHRM, I actually had a client approach me about a year ago saying, hey John, we need a handbook. And I said, I can help you write that. And I was kind of going, oh, I was dreading it. And then I went to SHRM, because I'm still a member at SHRM, and it's like, hey, they have an employee handbook builder. And it's probably, AI generated, but it's a browser interface. It's a $400 per year subscription for as long as you want to subscribe. And what's behind this tool, this resource, is Jackson Hewitt. Like, they're one of the biggest labor attorneys in the country, they have offices all over the country. But they are, nobody questions whether Jackson Lewis knows what they're doing or not. And so what this tool allows is, it's an interactive interface, user interface, and you click through and you answer a bunch of questions, and then it basically spits out, here's a draft. Now read this draft and then make it your own. So then you start to put in your personal attributes to it. But what the tool allows is that as laws are changing, and trust me, they are changing much more frequently today than they were 30 years ago. But as laws are changing, the tool gets updated, and then you get push alerts, and it's like, this section needs to be updated. And for $400, to me, that's a no-brainer. That's, again, Josh could tell you better than I, but that's like maybe a half of an hour of one of the attorneys at Jackson Hewitt. $400 a year is like, they're probably charging $800 an hour. Any attorney worth their salt. 8.2, I don't know if I'm on track or not. I was trying to go 2 minutes per slide. I feel like I'm talking fast, so. 8.2, so the next section of the handbook, and about compensation strategies. Compensation truly is art and science. It's a blend. Some people want it to be all science. Some people want it to be data-driven. The problem is you're dealing with people. And people, they don't care so much about data. They care about how they're feeling, and they care about their data. They care about the data they find, which might not be the same as the data you find. And so that's where the art comes in. But it really starts with, and I think the handbook does a good job of this for this section, is pick a lane, choose a philosophy. Are we going to be the high-paying firm in town? Are we going to be we'll keep our base salaries down, but we're going to have big bonus programs? It's like, so, and then how does that tie to your vision? How does that tie to your markets? So the kinds of fees that you're able to get, it's much different if you're doing custom one-off residential versus hospitals versus municipal projects, or, so your markets, your fee opportunities. How does that relate to philosophically how you want to work with people in your office? And then pick a lane. So because when you pick that lane, then you're able to articulate it, and you're able to articulate it clearly and consistently. A couple of pro tips. Cash is fungible. I just like using fun words. So fungible. What does that mean? That means I had hundreds of conversations over the years with team leaders saying, I want to extend an offer to someone, but their expectations, their compensation expectations are too high. And the very first question is, well, are they talking base salary or are they talking total comp? Base and total cash comp. Oh, well, I don't know. All right, well, let's find that out. And when you start to peel the onion back is every individual has a unique set of circumstances that motivates them. And so I honestly cannot remember when we didn't find a time where we were able to accommodate how someone was interested in earning their income and maintaining parity with our compensation, with our compensation system. And it's just, you have to kind of peel that onion back. And then you shape the outputs so that you are able to maintain that parity. But then test your outputs. So one thing, because firms are doing this every year, right? People expect raises. So you're going through, even if you didn't hire anyone, every year you're looking at everyone's compensation, at everyone's salary. And after you go through that, test your outputs. I mean, you literally have to go back. We would go back and go, okay, what were the raises that we're giving to guys? What are the raises that we're giving to women? What are the raises that we're to try and find out if there were any biases in the decision making. Because so our firm was nominally 120 people at the time, and team leaders would be involved in it. So there were many more people involved in the creation of that compensation model. And so I may believe that I know my own biases, but I don't know everybody else's biases. And so it's like you have to test that information. Horror story, question break. Somebody asked, do you know any good startup firm horror stories that you want to share with us? So it's not a startup firm, but this was a horror story that I read about when I first started in HR, I think I clipped this article out of the paper, and it was somebody in a New York firm, not necessarily an architecture firm, but they had taken a list of all of the compensation for, somebody legitimately involved in the process of compensation, and they had left it on the copier. Raise your hand if you know what a copier is. Okay. So they had left it on the copier, and the next person found it. That person was PO'd because they weren't the top name of the list. And because of what happens over time is you hire people at different times, there are different market factors at times. So what the story goes is that, they had a bunch of people quit. And it's like, that was a horror story to me. And so my response to that was operationally, what if that ever happened? What if I ever left the compensation list on the copier? What if I made that same mistake? I needed to be ready to tell you why your salary is the way it is and why hers was higher, even though it ticked you off. And so always know that you can, with confidence and competence and credibility, look someone in the eyes and say, well, this is why that is. Even if they shouldn't have known the entire list, you need to be comfortable when answering that. And actually, operationally, it probably more often manifests itself when after compensation reviews, every year, 1, 2, or 3 people would come to me and say, well, I'm not really happy, I was expecting more. And it's like, being able to dive into that and to share, well, this was the data we have. What data do you have? And to be able to have those conversations with confidence is key. Also pay attention to, here's one of these rapidly evolving legal things, is transparency laws. There are now a multitude of states that have salary transparency laws on the books. Like if you are ever wanting to hire somebody in Colorado, you have to post a salary range. I don't know what it is in North Carolina, if that's hit here yet. It hasn't hit Wisconsin yet. But especially if you're a multi-office organization, a multi-state, honestly, I lean more towards publish your salary ranges to your staff. Publish your salary ranges in your in your postings. And yet there are still people, it's like, well, I don't want to do that. That, we'll be on, our competitors will know what we're paying. Your competitors already know what you're paying because they're paying attention in the marketplace as well. Probably, the red things on the slides, because you guys hang on to the slides, those are like the one, like if you do nothing else from this slide, if you check out on this slide, just go back to the red thing. Have a really strong benefits broker. So compensation is not just cash, it's also benefits programs. And again, even if you're coming from the HR world, there is so much that is constantly evolving and changing in benefits that you need to have a broker that you really trust and rely upon and partner with. To not only to be able to articulate to staff, it's like, well, here are the new programs and this is what they are, but also to work with you on the strategies before you get to the point of unveiling them to staff. So it's, I know there are a lot of brokers that oftentimes it's just considered a vendor relationship. It's considered much more transactional. I think one of the best things that I ever found myself was a really phenomenal benefits broker. And like she would come in and say, hey, do you want to consider this new idea? And so we were churning through ideas. Compensation resources. This is a fast slide. These are when I was looking to put together the science of the art and science, these are the resources that I used. Somebody actually asked a question. How many of these should a firm use? Well, it depends on the size of the firm, and it depends on your confidence in the data, and it depends on your basically on the complexity of your firm. So it's like that last one, Robert Half. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but I looked at that for all of our administrators. Again, it's a 120-person firm. We had financial people and marketing people and HR people, and graphic designers. That's TCG is the creative group, and so Robert Half owns this whole salad bowl of companies. Robert Half office team, Robert Half technology, account temps, and the creative group. And so I was able to turn to them for a resource. What I really liked about them was they have this really handy market comparison tool. So it's like I could look at Milwaukee. Milwaukee was almost consistently 101% of national average for compensation ranges. And because we were a multi-officer, I could look at Madison, Wisconsin, I could look at Richmond, Virginia, and I could look at Chicago. Chicago was the odd duck out for us. They were always ran at about 23% of national market. And so then that's information I can use when I'm putting together compensation bands and understanding why somebody in Chicago, why a project architect in Chicago is being paid differently than a project architect in Madison, Wisconsin, because that's what the market demands. So, so that's why I like Robert Half, but you don't need that if you don't have any of these folks on your staff. I like salary.com because it's accessible, and that's generally the first place people will go when they're creating their own data. The AIA salary calculator, that only really became a thing like 5 years ago where you could easily go online. Maybe it was longer, but people weren't using it. People are using it much more today than they were in the past. But the key in the red, see, I glossed right over it, is pick the ones that you like, the ones that you discover work for you, and then stick with them year over year, because because each model has something different that they're good at. They all have strengths and weaknesses, but if you stay with the same sources, then you can identify trends, and that is very beneficial. All right, retention. Again, these come right out of the handbook and on page 467, and these are reasons that people give that when they leave firms. And this list was as true in the 1990s as the 2000s as it is today. From my point of view, it's pretty damn close. The purple ones, it's bait and switch. You sold me something, when you were recruiting me, and that's not what my experience was. So that's what the purple ones, the green ones, I didn't feel that you were valuing me as I valued myself. And the yellow ones, I didn't receive coaching or feedback. Huge. I wasn't able to grow. I didn't see opportunities for growth. I think that's probably the biggest one as to why people leave firms. And then the red one, from my point of view, is the most important, is I lost trust and confidence in the company's leaders. And like, that's irreparable once somebody loses that trust. So I already mentioned that SHRM is a great resource for people management. Even if you have no expectation of actively, going to SHRM conferences, local or national, an annual membership is $264. So if you're a smaller firm and you don't have a dedicated HR person, and maybe you have a consultant, I would still say that that's a good $264 is what I pay, so I'm assuming that that's what everybody pays. That's a good investment because they have such a deep library of resources that's easily searchable that you can pick a topic. When a client calls me today and they say, yeah, we have an issue with, this is one of the first places I'll go to make certain that I'm up to date, up to speed, before I start to pretend that I'm smart. And the great place to work, so I offer that as from our firm experience, how wonderful it was to participate in that program because they have this great trust index model. And so it's an evaluation program. And like every locality has 2 or 3, like your business journal and your local newspaper, like they're all running programs now. And they're probably all wonderful programs. To me, Great Place to Work invented the whole idea. They literally invented, back in the 80s, the whole company evaluation, and it's all built off of these 56 questions which measure the amount of trust between staff and firm leadership. And again, at a break, if somebody wants to dive into that, we can. Question break. Somebody asked, what do I do with a disengaged person? I think the specific question was somebody who's taking their concerns not to leadership but to peers. Did I paraphrase that pretty well, whoever asked it? All right, I'm going to trust that I did. And so I think one of the, and so this is just kind of more of a topical thing. One thing that we instituted, we did training around non-triangulation of conversations. And so, and maybe you all already understand that, but when you come to me and say, I have a real problem with Sam, our training was, and what did Sam say when you told him? What did Sam say when you talked to him? Well, I didn't talk to him. So, well, I'm not talking to him. I'm not talking to you until you talk to Sam. And so, to the degree that you can get your team to operate in that manner where they're having conversations with each other when there is a concern rather than about people, that will serve you very, very well. And there's probably a bigger answer to the question. I mean, the question is more specific. What do I do with somebody who's doing this right now? And so we can talk in more detail if you like. All right, section 3 of the handbook. So I just pulled out some sound bites for this one. Oh, did somebody ask another question? I'm not able to see those. You have to drag your question bubble like over the middle of the slide. Then you can see it. Yes?
I could ask it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the one you were, but I did just type one. So, in your experience over your career, when someone left due to lack of guidance or coaching or feedback, how did your firm handle that with the leadership or project manager who was over that person?
That's a bigger answer, and so I'm going to give you that answer.
Later.
To the degree that I can, when we get to the break in between.
Okay.
Because Josh may have some insights on that as well, but I think that that's a phenomenal question. And a part of the answer is you're looking for patterns. So is that a one-off, or are we seeing an erosion, multiple people over time? All right, sound bites. Page 476, I quibble with, it goes on about job descriptions, but it was describing it was also describing job postings. Understand that a job description and a job posting are not the same thing. I learned that the hard way. I used to create job postings that were full job descriptions. Nobody ever read the damn things. Especially in this world where you're pumping those postings out through LinkedIn and other social media sources. Too many people, because of our societal attention deficit disorder, they're not going to read through a whole job description. So from my point of view, those are two different documents that need to work together, but a job description is more of a sales marketing tool that is borrowing from the content of a thorough job description, and I am a big fan of thorough job descriptions. Page 479, there's a little anecdote in there about, I think it's like recruiting people on campus, and it starts out with, if you can get excited about your vision, you can. And actually, I think the more powerful statement is, if you can't get excited about your vision, who the hell is going to follow you? And that's not only true when you're recruiting people, but that's also true for your own staff. So you have to have a vision that everybody understands clearly, and especially if you are one of the top leaders, well, any leader in the firm, you have to be excited about it. I mean, if you aren't excited about it, well, then why is it your vision? And if you are excited about it, I've seen how people will rally around that. Case study, on page 485, there's a case study, which was fine, and they had a virtuous cycle diagram that applied to a firm dynamic, and I think actually the more powerful virtual cycle is at the individual level, and then we do talk about that in the book. That if you can align someone's passions and interests with what their job responsibilities are, it's phenomenal. It's that virtuous flywheel, because then they're happier, and if they're happier, they're providing better client service. It's almost impossible not to provide better client service. And if you're providing better client service, then you're probably going to end up with more repeat clients. You may be able to start to differentiate yourself and charge higher fees. So that's the flywheel that I think can be unleashed. All right, and now I'm going to cheat and go back to, I think it's section 8.1 or 8.2. It was a legal backgrounder. It was at the end of 8.1. So on page 458, this is just the only place I could fit this in. That backgrounder is a good foundational list. Josh may have a stronger opinion about it, but from my point of view, no matter your size of firm, know the Fair Labor Standards Act. Know it. Be able to converse with it with confidence when you're having conversations with other leaders in your firms. That's basically the law as it relates to when you classify someone as exempt or non-exempt. And if you don't already feel comfortable knowing what that means, we can talk about that later. But I spent a lot of time on this, and it's, are we hiring people into the right classification? And then when we are starting with someone that maybe is non-exempt, so on an hourly basis, working, maybe just out of school kind of thing, as they grow, and say they grow into a project architect role, we're going to transition them into an exempt role. Well, that's a tricky transition. And so there's complexity to this, and unfortunately for firm leaders who aren't interested in all things HR, they just want to be, oh yeah, that's whether we pay someone hourly or salary. That's just a small part of it. The key is, and I think I blew right past the key, the duties test. Exempt staff, it requires that they're using consistent exercise of discretion and judgment. And so if you're the kind of shop that's hiring and I'll say this derisively because I mean it, drafting drones, if that's your production model, drafting drones are not using judgment, right? And so you have to pay them on an hourly basis. You can't just call them exempt because you're an architecture firm. All right. 8.4, goal setting, professional development. There's a discussion in that section about the different camps of either separating the performance appraisal process with the salary review process or combining them. I am, and I will fight anyone, I will arm wrestle anyone on this one. I am firmly in the camp of separating those conversations with staff, and because of the expectations, just because they're humans. And so when we start to have a conversation, and your name is? Kelly. And so Kelly and I are sitting down for your annual review, like in December, and I'm going to tell you your raise, and we're going to talk about your performance. If I tell you your raise first, and you don't like it, then you've checked out of the rest of the conversation. If we talk about your performance, the whole time you're thinking, well, I wonder how this is going to impact the raise John's going to tell me at the end. And so to me, that's dysfunctional. That's a dysfunctional conversation. And so I really think that the key, you have to come up with a plan, then you have to keenly be disciplined to follow your plan, and that's the Kaler-Slater example, and I can get into more detail. But if you focus on goal setting rather than performance appraisal in this cycle of conversations, then for me, what goal setting means is that Kelly and I sat down and we talked about, and Kelly's on my team, and we talked about her goals for the coming year. And then let's say there's an incident with a client. A client calls and says they're unhappy with something that happened in an interaction with Kelly. I don't go to Kelly and say, I'm really sorry just to keep picking on you, but I don't go to Kelly and say, you really screwed up, or the client's unhappy, you messed up. But rather, I can go back to, remember the conversation we had, and you asked for more responsibility, and that, and so I can go back to the goal-setting conversation we had, and it's like I can offer observations how that, how this interaction, and let's say I was in the room too, so I witnessed it. It's not a he said, she said thing. I think that you could have approached it differently in order to achieve that goal. And so you take the judginess and the recrimination out of the conversation, and Kelly actually believes that I'm trying to help her achieve the goals that she and I had agreed on 4 months ago. So that's where I think the power of it is. Advancement strategies, clarity is the word in red. You have to create a framework and then stick with it. You have to have clear criteria. I think one of the smartest things our firm ever did was to separate job responsibilities and leadership advancement. Shannon, how much did I blow through the time?
We'll probably leave all our questions for the end.
Okay. Sorry.
When
Yeah. But I feel bad. See, I'm passionate about this crap. So, but I can wrap it up in 3 minutes or less. So, one of the smartest things we did was to separate the criteria for job responsibilities, how to grow from an ARC 1 to an ARC 2 to an ARC 3, and then separately have a set of criteria for leadership in the firm. So, and that can happen if you're a staff member, associate, if you have associates, associate principal, principal. Too many firms I've seen have, so I call it PM Wapatui. Raise your hand if you know what Wapatui is, or is that a Midwestern thing? Does anybody know what Wapatui is? Wow! Okay. You can Google it, but it's basically you just dump the Everclear and every other kind of alcohol that you have at the college party into the tub, and that's the punch that you're serving. So that's Wapatui. And so too many firms, from my point of view, have a PM Wapatui where it's like, if you're a project architect and you're wanting to advance in your career, it's like you have this sense that you have to become a PM. And I got a hint for you. There are a lot of great project architects that are terrible project managers. They're different skill sets. And yet, because project management is also, and so it's seen as firm leadership and project, and it's too intertwined. And from my point of view, it's very clear that those are two different things, and you just have to have two different sets of criteria for them. Okay, the book, Better Make It Real. Whether you read it or not, it's a gift, and the book is about design process that expands beyond architects. It's like architects and graphic designers and behavioral psychologists and all of that. And so it's the whole book is about this design model discipline. But at the end, on page 155 or something like that, now I know I've gone too long because my iPad timed out. Page 155, it talks about Kaler Slater's story, and that's the whole collaboration and culture piece to our firm, and every comment that I made was predicated upon the experience of that firm that's described there, which includes, and this is a great takeaway for a mini MBA class, on page 162, so the super quick backstory is we had one president, David Kaler, who I'm actually going to have lunch with today. He lives in Pittsburgh, and it transitioned to three individuals who were our poster children for collaborative leadership. We call them our three EOs. They were the three executive officers, and they shared the duties of CEO. And when they were processing through, well, what does that mean to them before they took on the role, they said, well, there are 10 things that, from their point of view, there were 10 things that any CEO is responsible for. And here are the 10. And Jim was responsible for the first column. George was responsible for the second column. Jill was responsible for the third column. And then they all shared communication. And we can get into any of those in more detail. And I ended with, love your team. I added trust in there. So this is John's version of Mark Toth's slide. No firm policy or handbook is perfect. As long as you begin with loving and trusting your team, you get a lot of latitude. And so from the point of view of your staff, if you show them that you care about them, they forgive imperfections. I can still demand excellence as long as I'm respecting them. I think I finished up in 3 questions, even though that's in 3 minutes, even though it was later. So there you go. Okay, so now we're going to do all the Q&A at the tail end? Okay. All right, I'm out.
And we'll touch on a couple of these questions as we go through, but please stop if you have something you want to ask. It's fine. We'll have time to address this. So I think Shannon shared some of my background. A question I get a lot is, why did you go back to law school after what was for me 5 years of a bachelor's degree in architecture? So I did work in between that time, and I was always interested in how design is shaped by policy, and spent a lot of time in architecture school on that subject, and had mentors that encouraged me to go back if I was really interested in pursuing the legal aspects of design, to get this other degree and become part of another profession. So I'm always interested in how architecture compares to other professions, just because I've seen there are these big disparities and differences. So these are my jobs that I've had. I worked in an architecture firm. My first job after I went back to law school, because I was an architect or had an architecture background, I was not licensed at that time. I worked in the legal clinic and was representing people who lived in public housing but were being evicted under whatever rules. So it looked like a housing claim, but it was really more about policy. But I ended up working on those, which was very interesting. In Tennessee, you can work in the legal clinic and represent clients in court before you pass the bar exam, which was really interesting experience. And then I worked in a law firm representing architects and engineers in insurance defense. After that, I got a job in-house at a smaller firm of about 100 people. I worked there for about 15 years, and then I got the job that I have now at a bigger firm, also as in-house counsel. And then all along, the AIA has been a big part of my career, and I've met some of you in this room through involvement in the AIA. Worked with AIA as a volunteer for about 15 years. And one of the things that was really important to me during the Great Recession, starting in 2008, I was asking the question, what is AIA doing to address what I saw as a really big issue, which was people that were my peers and really the whole generation being laid off. I had a lot of friends who were very passionate about architecture but did not see a path forward in the profession. And I was really concerned to know, we have this organization, how do we utilize that as a platform to address these really big issues? And I've been working on that ever since, starting with the Young Architects Forum. As mentioned, the mini MBA I thought was very important at the national level. I started that in 2014 and it continues now. They rebranded it as Taking Care of Business, so if you go to the conference this year, be on the lookout for that. But what I wanted to talk about today, 3 topics. So we'll look at the standard of care. I want to talk a little bit about intellectual property because that is changing so much, and then look at some professional licensure and ethics issues. So what is the standard of care? To answer that question, we take a step back and see how does risk impact our profession? And that's always been an important question for me because I felt strongly that sometimes as design professionals, we feel like we're taken advantage of. We feel like we're disadvantaged when it comes to the power structures in the larger economy. We feel like sometimes we're dragged along, but it's so important for us to lead on these issues of risk, not to be scared or fearful, but to see the opportunities, because really any project that we take on is going to bring some level of risk, but it's really how do we mitigate and work with that effectively. So some of the ways to deal with risk, and I will mention a lot of this risk background comes from the Project Management Institute, PMI. So if you're involved in project management, you may have seen some of this before, but I do encourage taking a look at those resources. They are the ones who provide the certifications in project management and risk management, which applies to all professions, not just architecture. And I think it gives us a language for communicating with clients, because that's another thing that we hear a lot about architects is we sometimes speak a different language, and that is not to our advantage when we're communicating with clients and with the public. So finding common language to use when we're talking about these issues is important. And what do we mean by the standard of care? Traditionally, this is something that comes from the law of the jurisdiction. Even without a contract, the standard of care still exists through court cases, which is referred to as the common law. But what happened over time is that owners would make their own definition of this. Regardless of what had been decided by courts over the years, they would put something in their agreements to say, if you're an architect working on my project, you will have perfect documents, there will be no issues, we won't have change orders. And so that was a problem. And the AIA stepped in and provided a standard definition that worked for everyone. And this is what that looks like. You may be familiar with this. It started showing up in the AIA documents in 2007. I'm on the AIA Documents Committee, and this is something that evolves over time. And so when we're talking about standard of care, it's not something that stays the same. The things that are happening now in practice change our standard of care. If you think about the conversation, for example, around resiliency, and there's a set of building codes that may apply to the project, but there may be a decision to go beyond the code. And so you can change the standard of care on your own project if that's a goal that you want to pursue. But then how do we effectively administer that over the course of the project? This is something that's referred to as non-technical risk drivers, and these are all potential downfalls for projects, but also areas to look for strengths. And you can see communication is at the top of the list. The lack of communication leads to most of the claims against design professionals, and that again gets back to our ability to communicate our purpose on a project, and how do we talk to clients, especially about the work that we're doing. You can see some of the others that are listed here. Sometimes it's surprising. Contract terms and negotiation is lower down on the list, and that's because most people read their contracts and negotiate them. If you're not doing that, it's already putting you behind on the project, because you can see most of the projects will not see that as an issue, but the contract will make any of these claims better or worse. So if you have a communications related claim with a bad contract, that will be a big disadvantage in being able to resolve it. Anything else on this list seem surprising or stand out to anybody? Yes. So project selection, client selection gets back to the idea that some projects are inherently more risky than others. So if you think about a condominium project, those are seen as very risky because people are in those projects around the clock. People own parts of those projects for themselves, but other parts are left to a collective to maintain. So inherently, those are very risky to work on and require special risk mitigation procedures. Other types of projects may be different and not as risky. So think about what project are you taking on before you ever start a concept for design. What are the risk strategies that you need to have in place? And then the client selection is the same kind of thing. The client may be inexperienced or they may have done the project many times. Both of those can present good and bad for you. If they're really good at this and have done it many times and know how to get everything to their advantage and have a system in place to make that happen, that's something you have to be aware of too. So looking at it a little bit differently, here is what we were just talking about. How many claims come from these different project types? And so you can see this data comes from professional liability insurance. So as the professional liability insurance carriers are looking at where are they paying money for architects as insured clients? And you can see what we were talking about, 37% comes from residential. That's not just condominiums, it's any residential. Compare that to industrial projects, which are very big projects a lot of times in terms of square footage, but not necessarily as risky as other project types. Anybody see projects on here that reflect what you're working on? You can see where healthcare shows up, is in some of these distributed around. So institutional and some of the others, it can be a mixed approach. And then another way to look at it, who are the people that are bringing claims against architects? You can see most of it comes from our relationship with the owner. The large firm roundtable of the AIA looked at this issue to understand how do our clients see us. They did a study. I encourage everyone to take a look at that. It was pretty eye-opening as to what clients understand that they're getting from us as architects, what are the successes and what are the concerns that they see from experience in working with architects. But you can see it's not just owners, there are others who may bring claims, and those are things to be aware of as well, because just because a lot of these come from the owner doesn't mean that they are the biggest in magnitude. Some of the ones that would come from others, non-contracting third parties, could be the most severe if you're thinking about a user of the project who gets injured or design that causes problems for someone, those can be costly as well.
What was the name of that study?
So there's a study from the AIA Large Firm Roundtable. I'll post a link in the Miro board because I think that would be helpful to be able to take a look at. So the next topic I wanted to touch on deals with intellectual property, and I'll start with the question, as architects, do we own our design? What do you think? Someone says it depends on the project. I see some heads shaking. So the answer to this is, as design professionals, we have a copyright to our design. That's without a contract. You don't have to have anything in writing. If you are designing something, you own the copyright to that work. But you can transfer it by agreement. And the other part of this is, even though you own the copyright, how do you defend against unlicensed use of your copyrighted work? We're seeing that play out right now with AI. As we know, AI is just gathering all the information that's available and putting it into an algorithm. A lot of that information is copyrighted information of design professionals. There are lawsuits dealing with artists and others who see their work being used, things coming out of Midjourney or something that look very similar to their work that they created, and so getting that resolved is something that's ongoing. But how does this affect us? We have these models of ownership, but the profession is changing very quickly with technology, and sometimes the regulations don't always keep up with how technology is advancing. So some of these other uses deal with how do we address the use of our intellectual property on a project. So dealing with BIM is typically a big issue. I've seen agreements where the agreement itself may be 30 pages, and then the BIM exhibit is 100 plus pages. So dealing with technology on a project is very important, but difficult sometimes for us to understand. And then we mentioned this is all changing with AI and machine learning, so we'll take a look at some of that. But how do we understand these different applications that are basis for our intellectual property and how it's shared? All of these different technologies, the hardware and software aspects of this can be interesting to sort out on projects. Some of these applications are more in use than others. You can see some of the ideas of how these things are sorted out and how does it apply to different projects. So we talked about BIM. That is probably the biggest one that is in use, but all of these others come into play in different ways. Anybody see anything on here that reflects anything that you're working on or topics of interest? Anybody working on digital twin on any of your projects? So just be aware, as this changes, we have to think about what regulations need to be in place, how does the agreement need to reflect the way that we're actually working as architects, and how does it reflect opportunities for us to expand services. So just because we've worked in a typical way in the past doesn't mean that that's the path forward for the future. And I think that's a message that I've communicated more recently, is that a lot of times as architects, we're thinking about legal aspects as something that's negative and things that we have to deal with to be able to do the other things that we want to do. But as technology and other things are changing, it really is opening up new opportunities. If we need to think of a new model for delivery of services, what is that going to look like? And then how do we learn from these lessons of the past to make sure that if we're moving in a new direction, that we're not just repeating some of the same problems that we've had before. So we are going through this transformation now as a profession. This is data that came from the AI Strategic Council's study of AI that they've been going through for the last couple of years. Some of this came from Phil Bernstein, who's a professor at Yale. He wrote a book called Machine Learning that I recommend. He was involved in the transformation from CAD to BIM and had patterns that he saw of missed opportunities for the profession when that took place, and trying to move forward in a better way. And this is what he is seeing, is that we're moving into machine learning, and really artificial intelligence would be utilizing that as later after we move through this next phase. So that looks at how we're currently using them. We're moving into something different, but we're trying things. Some things don't work, and then we discard them, and we're going through a process of learning how to utilize this new technology in practice. I've heard that we're still far away from having AI be able to create a set of contract documents, but then you see that there are things out there that will say that they're able to create documents. You just input some program and some other things, and you get a design for a building. Does that work? What are the problems and pitfalls that you would see with an approach like that? So this is another way of looking at the cycle that we're going through, that we have sometimes inflated expectations and then go through disillusionment about how the things that we've heard are not really going to hold up, and then we find some way of working with it. So we can draw our own conclusions. Where do we think we are as a profession with AI on this cycle? I think that we have gone through some of the inflated expectations, and we're now seeing the reality of what this technology can and can't do. And so finding where it's going to actually settle in our profession and move us forward is yet to be determined. Anybody want to share, how are you using AI? Has that come up in this session? Have you talked about AI as you've been going through this course? I see some heads shaking. Anything anyone wants to share? Janine?
Graphics were like a play model, and the change to graphic made it more realistic. But I feel like the AI processor, it's sort of like imagery, precedent imagery, and then it kind of pastes materials, applies it to your graphic.
It's really good at creating early conceptual imagery. I've heard there's still some concerns about the intellectual property rights to some of that, because if you think about, as designers, a lot of times we'll do image boards and pull together lots of things just to see what does a client respond to. That is usually copyrighted work of other people. Now that's going through AI. Usually that's not too big of a concern, but you do want to understand how it's being used. I was interested, I saw on social media recently there was a candidate for a local office in Australia, and they said, if I'm elected, I'm going to give you parks, and had created images of parks in their city through AI and posted that, but the constituents looked at it and were zooming in on, people who looked very strange, because it came through AI, and didn't respond well because it was seen as over-promising. You can create these wonderful images, but then what do you actually deliver? So how do we use this ability to create very rapid conceptual imagery and still be able to deliver something that's in the physical world?
I used it to rewrite my business plan this summer, and I've been using it as a writing tool, like to help me QC on emails or to expand my marketing writing. Basically taking an idea that I have and expand it beyond what I can do and the amount of time I have.
Yeah, and you have the process in your mind, and it's used as a support tool to help guide through that. I think a lot of people have seen their applications to help find blind spots sometimes if you have an idea in your mind, and sometimes it's hard for us to think about what are the other things, just thinking objectively about this issue, and finding clarity just in language sometimes can be helpful. Yeah. Great.
Josh, are you seeing a lot of claims or anything related to AI?
So as far as claims related to AI, that's always a caution. That was a big concern when we started going into BIM, that there would be all of these claims related to use of 3D modeling, and that was new. It really hasn't materialized from what I have seen. There's still a lot of concern about how we use BIM. When it goes into clash detection, sometimes we as design professionals feel like who are being beat up by the contractor because they'll do this clash detection on very early data and then say, well, here are all these things that we're going to have to do. And with AI, there could be something similar, but again, it's not being used that much for the things that actually go into construction. When we start to see that, that's when we have to be very careful about how it's being used, building codes and other types of issues. Also wanted to touch on professional licensure and ethics. How many people are signing and sealing drawings in this group? Most, at least over half of this group. How do you feel about that?
A little nauseous.
Yeah. So I talk to, at our firm, every year, people who are newly licensed, and that is a big concern because you passed the test, you're now licensed, you have the ability to stamp and seal your name is on the set of documents, and that raises a lot of questions. It really puts you into a new stage of your career just because you're putting yourself in the shoes of the design professional of record, and so these things come home to roost for us when we're the ones asked to do that, and it just raises all of these questions that we want to think about. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, so we have this climate of what's sometimes under the guise of regulatory reform. And I will mention, I just went through the candidacy process with AIA where I was talking to people all over the country. People in North Carolina talked to me a lot about the Building Codes Council and architects being represented in that group and being moved out. They were very concerned about what does that say for the future of the profession, and what do we as an organization do to address that? And we're saying that AIA as a national organization needs to provide support because what happens in one state on these regulatory issues can move to other states. And so I just wanted to mention, that's the next step. When you start to ask yourself those questions as an individual, a lot of times it comes back to us as the collective to address, especially these big advocacy issues, because you can see this threat of deregulation is something that is popping up all over the country and something that we have to address. So we do have a code of ethics as the AIA. This is a living document. There have been updates to this in recent years. There were some recent updates that dealt with harassment and workplace conduct. There were some other updates that dealt with design for facilities of incarceration. So things are happening all the time. There are interest groups in the profession that are making recommendations for the update to the code of ethics, and that has to be considered. I encourage reading this document as well. This represents collective knowledge of our organization and profession, and take a look at the comments in here. Think about how do those show up in your day-to-day work that you're doing, and think back to the presentation that John gave earlier about how architects interact with their employees, because that has been a bigger focus in this document, is thinking about if you're in a position of influence and power in your organization, are you using that to support people, or are there conflicts that result? And it's been an issue for us in our profession in the past. And I think one of the things that really stood out for me was, when I switched over to law school and had worked in architecture in the past, one of the first things that happened with our incoming law class was we had someone who came in and said, you are now entering this profession. There are mental health issues that you are at risk for by electing to make yourself a part of the legal profession. Substance abuse, depression, other things that lawyers deal with more than other people in society. And I was listening to that just thinking, this is good to know, but I was also thinking, I never heard something like this in architecture school. And we face a lot of unique issues, not the same as lawyers, but what are the issues that we have that present challenges for us? We need to be aware of those, and I think that we're now coming to terms that we need to be thinking more about what is our profile as a profession. We deal with a lot of stress and other issues. how do we show up and how do we deal with those? That's sometimes now in the code of ethics. So how do you see professional licensure affecting your career path? Anybody have any thoughts on this one? Is everyone licensed in this group? How many people are licensed as architects? Everybody? Some aren't? Okay. Do you feel like that's important? Do you feel like licensure is important as part of your career path? I see heads shaking, yes. Okay. So one other thing I wanted to mention before we close this part is I've talked a little bit about how the AIA supports these efforts. This is a diagram that represents the national AIA. You can see there are a lot of groups on here. The board of directors is at the top, but there's also this other bubble to the side of that, which is the AIA Strategic Council. I've been working with that group for the last 3 years and just wanted to mention that because that is the group with AIA that looks at what is the future of the profession, what are the topics that we as architects need to be focused on and addressing. And this is the group that's the current leadership of the council, so I'm working with them, and that's been really eye-opening for me because I've had a chance this year to shift more into listening mode and listen to the study groups that are discussing these issues and understand how are we as a profession setting groundwork for things that we need to be doing moving forward. These are the groups that the council is studying. You can see there's equity. The climate group is now focused on design for water in 2024. There's a group working on AI. There's a group looking at the value of architecture and our services. And this year, the council for the first time passed a resolution that focused on well-being and human health in design. Matt Barnett is the representative from North Carolina on the council, and he is part of the well-being group. So that, we now have a conduit from every state to this group. So I just wanted to mention that. If you're thinking about topics that you think are important, this is one of the areas where the AIA starts to look at that. And we put a survey in the Miro board that the council is asking for input on what do you think is needed for AIA to look at starting next year. So I encourage all of you to take a look at that. It doesn't take very long, and go ahead and share your thoughts because it is very important. Okay, that gets us through the prepared material, and we now have some time for open discussion. We touched on a couple of the questions that we got in advance. One question that I heard asked is, how do you set your insurance limits for starting a new firm, going after projects? One thing that I recommend is having a relationship with your insurance broker. They usually can give you information for your region, your state, your practice profile. But another thing that I think is good, especially if you're thinking about starting your own firm, look at what would be the first public project that you would pursue. Is it work for the state? Is it work for a higher education institution? Because a lot of times they have standard insurance terms in their agreement forms. So just take a look at what do you see as the first opportunity to pursue public work, because that takes a lot of time just to go through the pursuit process. Even if you see yourself as a sub-consultant on a bigger team, go ahead and look at what the prime agreement would require, because a lot of times that'll be passed on to the entire team. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. What other questions do we want to talk about?
I guess, do you all want to take questions together? I think I saw people posting questions on the board.
So yeah, why don't we look at some that have been posted, and we can both maybe.
Yeah. All right. How has HR changed since 2020 with the hybrid workforce to Gen Z?
Phenomenal question. Who asked that one? Points. It's changed radically. And probably so I'm going to put this in context. So I left the firm I was with at the end of 2021. So I, kind of got them through the beginning of the pandemic in my role. and then have been working with a variety of clients since then. Mostly small to medium-sized firms, but I'm paying attention to what the larger firms are, and I think Josh may want to weigh in on this as well. I mean, as it relates to, well, you know, like what Gresham Smith has been doing. But I've generally seen two attitudes come out of it, like so post-pandemic, there are the firms, there are some smaller firms that recognize the power of working with staff on either a hybrid or a remote basis. And so they're able to now better punch above their weight, because, I mean, I'm working with a firm in Madison, Wisconsin right now, a smaller market, and they're hiring staff around the country. And that's where the talent is. So the talent that might not exist in Madison, and so they have operationalized working functionally on a remote basis. Now, one of the questions is, how do you maintain that esprit de corps, that sense of professional community? And you have to work, I mean, they have to work at it, right? So they have lots of different activities, and they gather virtually on a fairly regular basis. I think they pull everyone together a couple of times a year kind of thing. But they have seen this as an opportunity. And then there are other firms that basically said, we don't trust our staff. This is just a big mess. We aren't going to do hybrid or remote anymore. Everyone has to start working back in the office. And that's a challenge to everyone who has discovered for themselves, each individual who's discovered for themselves, the opportunity to create more work-life balance through working hybrid or working remotely. And so it's, so how has it changed? Well, it's a whole raft of issues that most firms hadn't been dealing with. Again, I'll offer that Kaler Slater, it's like everybody was working off of a laptop in our firm for like 15 years. And so when the pandemic hit and we trusted our employees, we said, take your laptops home, take your Aeron chairs home, because we all have to work remote. And that has continued to play out in supporting people to be successful working remotely, but that element of trust has to be there. Is that helpful? Is that on point enough? I don't know. How about you guys?
I think one thing that I've seen that really is changing is this idea that in the past there was HR and they will tell you what is happening about all of these employment issues that affect your experience working in this organization or office that you're a part of. Now it's more, there's an expectation, I think, that there's dialogue, and it's not just HR telling what's going to happen. They are facilitating conversations around these issues. I know in our firm, we established employee resource networks around topics that employees were very interested in talking about. So there's one that looks at how are women working in the firm and what issues need to be raised to HR that they need to be aware of. Racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ. They formed a new one to look at caretakers, so people that are taking care of elderly parents or have children, and how does the workplace need to change to support those people. They just had a new one that formed to reflect faith-based interest. And so if you're part of a different faith in the workplace, do you feel a sense of belonging? And does HR know everything they need to know from employees around those issues? So I think that's changed a lot, because it used to just be, well, you'll accept what HR tells you, this is our policy. Now I think they need to be talking and having conversations.
And to tack on ideas to that, like even the faith-based question, it's there was actually about a 10-year period of time that Kaler Slater had an office in Singapore. So it was probably 50-50 staffed from folks who moved over from Wisconsin and people that were hired locally. And locally in Singapore is from India and South Korea and Malaysia and Australia. And so as a firm, we were faced like immediately with more variety in faith traditions that people practiced. And so our holiday policy, it's like, okay, well, you know, it's all of these US legal holidays, you know, and then Thanksgiving and Christmas, all were meaningless to some of these people that we were hiring in Singapore. And so we came up with a more flexible way to approach holidays where each individual, where there was equity, if you will. It's like, all right, you know, these are paid days where you don't have to be in the office, and just came up with a new way to structure it to accommodate that. And the other tack-on idea was, your question was, how has HR changed? Kind of tacking on to Josh's point, HR can facilitate conversations, can facilitate problem solving around these changing issues, you know, big societal ones or small ones. But if the firm leadership isn't buying into making change, so like kind of going back to that experience where some firms have basically retrenched back to pre-pandemic, and it's like, I don't trust people to work on their own. I don't trust them if I can't see them. That's a firm leadership choice. Doesn't matter what HR thinks. You know, I'm assuming HR is a part of leadership, but that's not always the case. HR isn't always a part of firm leadership. So.
Next one for Josh. Go back and forth.
Here.
Okay.
This is a good one. How do you handle clients that don't want to hire you for construction phase services?
I was just dealing with that yesterday. So there was a project where a developer hired for the full scope of services, including construction, and then said, well, the budget's getting cut, so we don't want you to come on site. We want you to review some submittals that we pick, but not all of them because we can't afford it. If there are RFIs, we still want you to respond to those. And it was kind of like, well, it sounds like you still need all of these things, because as I'm hearing that, you know, we're not going to know about these things unless we are on site. We're already only there once a month. So it's a huge problem. If you look at the insurance data, a project that's design only is very much more risky than a project where you're providing construction, because a project that's never built has very little risk. All of the risk happens in construction. That's where all the problems will arise. If there are issues with the design, that's when it should be caught. So talking to clients about that, I think you have to put it in their terms. What are they looking for? And the client who was saying we can't afford it, they still had a need for it, and so we had to just talk to them about, you know, the contract says all these things, and it sounds like you're perceiving a need for it. And so, you know, we can work with you to maybe modify some of that, but we're not going to have no construction. So I think it's important to talk about what is it that we're actually doing in the construction phase, because if you read through like a contract description of review of submittals, for example, it sounds very dry and it's very wordy. And so sometimes the clients will see that and say, well, I could just cut all of this out. I don't really need that. But then you say, well, the submittal is how we verify that you're actually getting what you're paying for. And without that, who knows what they're going to install? Like, it could be anything. And then when you put it in the terms of what they're concerned about, I think it gets back to using the right language and understanding what they're actually getting. But it is an important conversation to have. I don't recommend doing design without construction. I also don't recommend, if the client wants to hire for construction phase only, that's also a red flag. You don't want to be coming in to do CA unless you have a limitation of liability or something that really protects you, because that can be a big exposure.
That was a good answer.
Anything to add?
I was about to, but then you addressed it. Right at the end. It's like, would you take, because a part of how you're answering the question with the anecdote was, we've got this client that signed a contract, including those services, and now they were wanting to peel them back. So it's like, would you sign a contract with a client who was trying to negotiate up front that you not provide those services? And I heard you say you wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't. Yeah.
Okay, another HR question, touching on that transparency topic. Today's generation share compensation with each other, where prior generations really have not. Pros and cons with compensation transparency across a company.
Excellent question. Who asked that one? Great question. It's a great question because I welcome it, because I have a point of view that I was advocating for pay transparency years ago. Never got firm leadership to say, yeah, that's a good idea. But there were firms even 20 years ago that were publishing it, not necessarily architecture firms, but there were businesses that had that as that was how they operationalized it. It's just, everybody knows what everybody else is making, at least on a base salary basis, not necessarily on an incentive or a bonus basis. Yes, I think you're correct that today's generation, there are more tools to make the conversation comfortable. So back when I was a kid, it's like you literally had to talk to somebody like at a bar. It's like, oh, what are you making? Oh, what are you, and so there is, and that can be uncomfortable if you're in that conversation and you have a lack of confidence as to what you're making. I don't know if I'm being treated fairly or not. Now with social media and Glassdoor and all the other tools, it gets shared out. So the reality is that I think, and I think I made this point, I think it's silly for firms to believe that there isn't that sharing of information happening more routinely. So my attitude, so pros and cons. The only con would be kind of coming back to that little horror story. It's if I as a firm owner, sorry David, I knocked the thing. If I as a firm owner am not confident that I can answer the question why, when you ask me, why does Kelly get $500 a year more than me? And so as long as I have that confidence, and typically firms are not sharing exactly what someone's making, but my observation is more progressive firms are publishing to their staff what the pay ranges are for each level of responsibility. This is what an ARC 1, this is the ARC 1 band, the ARC 2 band, the ARC 3 band, and that they're being disciplined about, again, paying people paying base salaries within those ranges. If you're doing that, and if I'm confident that that as a firm owner we're doing our homework and the bands are reflecting market reality, then I really don't think there's a con. You get into the difficulty in a larger firm with multiple offices across multiple states, it's now you're adding complexity into it that I had to deal with a little bit, but not a lot. I don't know, would you add anything?
I think that's true. I think, if you have never done an equity study of your firm's compensation, it is a huge con to then provide transparency where you reveal all the men are making more for the same job. You have no minorities in leadership positions, or they're making much less money. So, taking a look at yourself first and making the changes that are needed puts you in a position to provide compensation transparency. I feel like that's one of the big reasons as a bigger profession we have not had transparency in the past, is because if we saw what it was, people would not be happy with what they were seeing. The other thing that I think is important is, everybody familiar with the AIA compensation survey? It gives some compensation data. What I've seen about that is, especially the newer generations are much more granular in the way they are looking at that data. So just giving a number for salary does not answer most of the questions. And that became very clear for me. When I was working with the Young Architects Forum, we had the Affordable Care Act that was going into place at that time. That was a big disruption in healthcare insurance everywhere. And we were getting questions, my deductible is going up on my healthcare plan. Now it will cost me $5,000 if we have a new baby, or if I have surgery, it's going to cost this much more, and then there's an out-of-pocket max. And so I think that I'm paying all the money, but then there's this other pot of money that I have to fill after the fact. And it was like, well, the compensation survey is not telling us anything about that, and that's a huge part of overall compensation. So how do we have something that gives us a clearer picture of all of the ways that compensation is a fuller issue? And I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's the kind of thing that we have to be looking for, is much more data. That requires more transparency. It's something that changes every year. It's always a moving target of those types of issues, but and those kinds of things.
So I actually like your answer better than mine, in that don't do it if you haven't done what Josh said. It's like, first look yourself, because it will be obvious to you. It's like, oh yeah, that's gonna look bad, right? So maybe if you have maybe if you're working towards that intentionality of providing pay transparency, approach it as a 3-year project or a 5-year project. It's like, where are we today? And it's like, all right, we need to realign, can we have to go through some compensation chiropractic here? And to get to the point where you feel comfortable and confident that what you're sharing with folks, and again, it doesn't have to be at a person by person level specifically, but what we're sharing makes sense and has the elements of equity in it that you want to have in it. And then to your point of cash compensation being only one element of total compensation, there are many models of, and I know several architectural firms who do this, who at the end of the year, they give you a statement of, these are all of the benefits that you received and the cash value to it. I never bought into that personally, kind of fully, because it's sort of, from my point of view, it's like, people know that there's value to health insurance, et cetera, and so I didn't feel like we had to hit them over the head and saying, see how great we are, that, here's the value of the health insurance, here's the value of your PTO days, here's the value of your holidays, and yet I know that there's another, do you guys do that? Do you provide a statement at the year end with, this is the total value of all of the benefits that you get?
Yeah, we do a statement, yeah.
And do you like that? I mean, so why did you do it, and are you happy you did it? And more importantly, is your staff, do they appreciate getting it?
I mean, I think it's something that it could be more of a conversation. It's like a document that goes out as an email. You don't always know, do people know what this means? Because it kind of shows your 401k match, here's how much it was. And
right.
I think it is good to put it in writing so people see it. I think having more of a discussion is usually helpful to get feedback. But I agree. And then another thing that I see is paid parental leave is a big topic, and what does that look like? Because you have FMLA that really is not paid. It gives you some time that you can't be fired, but like paid parental leave policies, is that something that's available? Is it equal for men and women giving leave? Does it provide support for adoption? All of these different things, that type of thing, and it affects sometimes a certain demographic of your employees, and some of the other people will say, well, this is providing benefits to one group but not to me. And so, we can say, have balance. It's sometimes difficult because, the people who are being paid more feel like they deserve what they're being paid. And so, having those conversations is not always easy.
And I ended up in some of those conversations over the years where it would be probably fair to say that our benefits programs at Kaler Slater were family friendly. There were these investments like you were just describing, and there were some single individuals saying, well, I don't know what's doing for me. And the only answer is, well, there are several answers to that, but I think the most important is, well, look at the complexity of all the kinds of projects that we're trying to accomplish with our clients. Nobody can do it by themselves. It has to be this robust, complex team effort to get it done. And some of those team members are single and some are family, but you are getting value out of the opportunity of working with these other talented individuals. And so if the market is, the market tells me quite clearly that we have to have some of these programs if we want to attract individuals who have families, and families it's not even a simple complex anymore. It's a simple idea anymore. It's now this wonderful tapestry on what does a family mean? To your point, caregivers to senior, to my parents kind of thing. So family is so much different today than how it was myopically understood 30 years ago. And if I want to, and this is kind of a cliche phrase, but if you want to present yourself as an employer of choice to the talent pool in your market, you better well be paying attention to what individuals who have complex families are looking for as far as support in benefits programs. Or you don't get the work done. I'm doing my best to give long answers.
I have a question. Kind of going back to the salary, the AIA salary thing. I think it would be interesting if there was another layer of information, just kind of to reflect what you said earlier about different cities having like a higher cost of living. Because it's like in that salary calculator with the AIA, it's like Southeast, Northeast, well, like Buffalo and Boston. I mean, it's going to cost different amounts of money to live there, just like Greensboro and Raleigh. So I wish there was another layer.
There is. There actually is another layer. So what you are correctly reacting to is the online salary calculator. Mm-hmm. That's one manifestation of the compensation survey that is updated like every 3 years, every 4 years. It's kind of, and if you buy that compensation survey, and I think the last time I bought it was like, $300 or $400 or something.
I'll just quickly throw out that if you're AIA North Carolina, there's a free copy you can look at anytime.
Ooh, there you go. Excellent. So I don't know if the microphone picked that up, but AIA North Carolina has a copy upstairs in their resource library that you can access. And that actually, the survey can only reflect where they have received a lot of data from. Like it needs to be 5 or more responses, otherwise. And so, for example, like any of the larger metro areas, they will have their own survey results that you can look at. So there's Massachusetts results and there are Boston results. Wisconsin, yeah, I think actually Milwaukee, there were enough responses. So I would be surprised if the triangle wouldn't have an entry for, but you still need to, from my point of view, so that's interesting, as it may flavor what you're learning from the regional basis or the state basis, because in this day and age, you're rarely only competing for talent in one local marketplace. I mean, maybe many of you are in smaller firms and that is your reality, that you're only drawing from one metro area. But I felt that I needed to know nationally, regionally, state, and local if it was available. It's a lot of data, but it helps, but that's, again, it's art and science. I don't know if you would add anything.
That's great that North Carolina has one available. I always think that that's a good benefit, and I encourage to go take a look, and if you haven't seen it, look at the data for your location and compare it to people you know in other places, because I think it is good to know.
Yeah, and if I have a quibble with AIA's survey is that, and this may be modifying, but for most of my tenure in the HR role, there was an over-reliance on the number of years of experience, which doesn't necessarily correlate to someone's job responsibilities. I mean, if someone's a real go-getter and they're good at what they're doing, with 5 years of experience, that looks different than somebody with 5 years of experience who's kind of sort of paying attention to their career. And so again, it's art and science. So you start with the data, but then you have to look at how the people on your staff may be diverging from the neat little bands that AIA has described.
Somebody have a question?
Yeah, probably for you, Josh. What advice or concern, caution, or comfort do you have for those ceiling drawings?
What advice?
So the question was, what words of advice, what concerns do you have for people who are the ones signing and sealing the documents? So one thing that I always tell people, if you're an employee of a firm, your all actions as an employee are covered under the firm's professional liability policy. So that's the first step that I recommend, is take ownership of that policy. It's for the firm, but it protects you. And if you have questions about what happens if there's a problem on the project, that policy is there to protect you. And a lot of times there will be conferences for professional liability insurance. I go to one every year. I encourage people to start participating in that, because it's going to give you resources and put you in a cohort of other people, not just in your firm, that are doing the same thing. And I feel like having that peer network is really important to understand, well, here's a firm where if you sign and seal, they're putting in place, process for responsible charge, and I don't see that happening in my firm. So I think we should be doing that, because I would feel more comfortable if we had similar process. And I think it's time to start looking around and seeing, do you feel like the process at your firm makes you feel comfortable, makes you feel supported? Are there things that need to be done differently? And then walk through what happens in the worst case, because there is a lot of anxiety when you start to sign and seal that I see from people, and just understand what's going to happen. Like if somebody, if the building collapses and you are the architect of record, look at that project in Florida where the condominium project fell to the ground, that happens. And that project was built in the 70s, but they're looking at everybody who worked there over the years, who came and inspected, who signed documents, not just sign and seal, but wrote their name, signed a letter about, I was at this project. What happens when that takes place? And It doesn't make you feel more comfortable, but it makes you understand like there is a process, and you know, there's insurance, there are other things that are going to help you. And the other thing is I think it's helpful to learn from other people's mistakes, and I really like seeing case studies more so than just the generalized data, but look at some of the case studies of claims and understand what happened to those people who were the architect of record when they got sued. You know, they're still alive, they're still practicing, they're still, you know, doing everything that they needed to do. But those are some of the things that I think help, and it's kind of like forcing you into a new stage of professional adulthood. It's like you are now the person in these shoes. And I mean, that's kind of the thing that I think about when I think about, I was an intern architect when they still called them that. I had a degree, but I was an intern. And you know, I looked at what are these people doing? Do I want to be in their shoes in 5 years, in 10 years? Maybe not. And so I would change firms, or you know, it's those kinds of things that I think you want to be thinking about. But it is, I still encourage people, even with the fear and anxiety that sometimes comes along with it, don't shy away. I sometimes talk to people who say, well, I'm not going to be licensed because I don't want to take on the liability. There is no reason to hold yourself back professionally because of those fears. It's just something that we need to address and feel like you feel prepared for it.
And even if you don't have a license, but you're providing the equivalent kind of services, that doesn't mean that you aren't going to be sued. So I had before, and there may be another great question that you want to get to, but I had two thoughts. But one of them is, so Kelly, your table mate, she had a question, and I said, oh, we'll address that later. But she's out of the room, so pass. And then one question had been asked up front about moonlighting, and I don't know if that's...
I think Eileen's question might be here.
Okay.
With someone left your firm due to lack of guidance coaching, how did your firm address
That's
those
it.
shortcomings in that
Yeah.
PM situation?
Well, I kind of want to wait for Eileen to come back.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Maybe
I don't...
moonlighting, yeah.
If you want. So
Sure.
moonlighting, yes, no? That's interesting?
Yeah.
Okay. Simple answer. So Kaylor said, we had a form for it. We allowed it. So again, about 120 person firm. We allowed it because there are lots of opportunities for you to grow as a professional, working on projects that enhance your career development, and there are projects that we have no interest in. Your aunt wants an addition to her porch or a doghouse or a garage or whatever it might happen to be. So our rules were, and this is just off the top of my head, you needed to talk to your team leader, just to let them know, to inform them. It needed to be a project, and in that conversation, that gives the team leader an opportunity to assess, is this something that we would have want Kaylor Slater to pursue? At the same time, to assess, is this something that would be competitive to the interests of the firm? And if both of those were clean, it's kind of like, no, you know, that sounds like a great project for you, not for the firm. Then it is, you're doing it on your own time. Again, we're very flexible with time, so you might be having a 1 hour conversation with something in the middle of the day. We would just ask that you're not recording that as work, Kaylor Slater work time, right? So that notion of fungibility again. So that you aren't, that you're still fulfilling all the responsibilities of your role, and that you aren't using firm resources. So I don't care if you're using your laptop. I mean, you don't wear the laptop out any faster, but you know, other office resources, licensed copies of software that may be in a pool that others need to be accessing, kind of thing. So as long as you are generally following those rules, we were fine with moonlighting. And then, and I think this is part of your question, how does that impact liability? We had a form. It was literally a half a sheet of paper, and it said, your first name is? Matt. Matthew, and this is a form from you to your client. So I, as the client would fill in their name, understand that Matt is my architect. Kaylor Slater has no involvement and is providing no review or supervision of this whatsoever. And it was language to that effect. And it's because of the liability issues, because when, if you undersize the anchor bolts and the garage goes flying away in a storm, you probably don't have, and you're probably not carrying insurance. But Kaler Slater is, and if somebody got hurt in that, it's like, well, Matt was an employee at Kaler Slater. Somebody must have been looking at what he was doing, because we have E&O insurance, so it was the available deep pocket. So that's how we handled it. We were okay with it as long as our interests were in alignment and you got your client to sign that acknowledgement, which we just threw in the file. I don't know if your approach is radically different or...
I mean, we have a policy at our firm about moonlighting that's pretty typical. One thing that I think is interesting with moonlighting is thinking about how is this part of your personal business plan for the future of your career? What are the goals that you want to get out of? You have this work setting that you're a part of. Now you're looking at other opportunities. And I mean, there are firms where the business model is based on paying a low salary to the employees with the expectation that they're going to go work at the School of Architecture as an adjunct and try to offset the low salary with the prestige that we give them, but no compensation for that. Or there are firms where a lot of the people are moonlighting at Uber or something because there's a low salary. And does that mean that you need to start looking at a different firm? Is the moonlighting something that the firm is kind of forcing you into, or is the moonlighting something where you're seeing a bigger opportunity? And then the other thing is the moonlighting part of architecture, or are you looking at a different career path? I mean, that is something, I was not moonlighting as an attorney when I changed careers, but I had to take the LSAT while I was working at an architecture firm and do the LSAT prep and other things that were really part of starting up a new career path. And there was a plan that I was working on of how will this go if everything falls into place the way that I want it to. So, and that required like a new set of mentors because my architecture mentors could not advise on this new career path. So think about, do you have the support network in place for this bigger goal that the moonlighting is a part of?
And I think that's great. I think it was clear my answer was I was myopically thinking of it as that the moonlighting was architectural work as opposed to something, if somebody wanted to go work at Target or Kohl's or something like that, they didn't have to fill out the moonlighting form. But I think Josh's first point is an important one. Not that you can control why somebody on your team would affirmatively decide to do architectural moonlighting. That's their life. But in that conversation, to learn that that it's a more technically oriented person in your firm, and this gives them an opportunity to exercise their design chops, again, on their aunt's garage or something. It's like, that's great. And, then I would think you might want to be supportive of that. There was going to be, the only other thing was, so I tried it when I was a kid. I hated it. It's like, wow, I just got home from a long day, giving my all, and now I have to be responsive to another client, at night. It's like, I tried it once and I didn't moonlight after that.
All right, we've got to stop there because we're running a little late here, a little past 11. But thanks again so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
But just let Eileen know that we had this fantastic answer
yes,
to
I
a question while she was out of the room.
Thank you again for your